The alarm didn't just wake me up. It confirmed my worst fear. At 2:13 a.m., someone was breaking into the one place I had hidden from my daughter her entire life. But what chilled me wasn't the break-in. It was recognizing the man behind the mask, my daughter's husband. I never thought silence could become a habit, but over the years, it settled into my life like dust in an old room. Quiet, unnoticed, and everywhere. My daughter grew up inside that silence without even realizing it at first. When she was little, she used to ask me everything. Why the sky changed colors at sunset, why I locked certain drawers in the house, why I sometimes stared too long at nothing. Back then, I always had answers ready, soft ones, harmless ones. I told her stories instead of truths, and she believed me the way only a child can, completely, without question. The warehouse was just another story to her in those early years. "It's an old storage place," I used to say whenever she pointed at it from the car window. It stood far from the city, quiet and forgotten, surrounded by land no one seemed to care about. She would press her face against the glass and ask if we could go inside someday. I'd smile, shake my head, and promise her ice cream instead. Distractions were easy when she was young. Simpler things held her attention, and I held on to that innocence for as long as I could. But children grow up, and curiosity grows with them. By the time she was in her late teens, the questions came back, stronger, sharper, harder to deflect. She noticed things she hadn't before. The way I avoided that road whenever possible. The way my voice changed whenever the warehouse came up. The way I never, not once, allowed anyone near it. Not her, not friends, not even workers. It wasn't just a place anymore. It had become a mystery, and mysteries demand answers. "Why won't you just tell me what's inside?" she asked one evening, leaning against the kitchen counter with her arms crossed. Her tone wasn't playful anymore. It carried frustration, maybe even a little hurt. "It's nothing important," I replied, keeping my eyes on the paperwork in front of me. I had learned long ago that eye contact made lies harder to carry. "If it's nothing important, then why is it such a big deal?" she pressed. I didn't respond right away. There are moments when silence feels safer than any words you could choose, and this was one of them. But silence, I realized too late, can also feel like rejection to someone who just wants honesty. "You don't trust me," she said quietly. That sentence landed heavier than anything she had said before. I looked up then, finally meeting her eyes, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Distance. Not anger, not exactly. Something colder, something that told me I was already starting to lose her. "It's not about trust," I said carefully. "Then what is it about?" she asked. "Protection," I wanted to say. "Fear. The kind of past that doesn't stay buried no matter how deep you hide it." But none of those words made it out of my mouth. Instead, I gave her the same answer I always did. "It's just not something you need to worry about." Her expression changed, and this time I could see the shift clearly. She wasn't just curious anymore. She was shutting down. "Everything with you is not something I need to worry about," she said, shaking her head. "Maybe I want to decide that for myself." I didn't have an answer for that. Or maybe I did, but it wasn't one she would accept. That was the night I realized something had changed between us. Something subtle but permanent. The space that secrets create had finally started to show, like a crack in glass that spreads without warning. Time passed and life moved forward the way it always does, whether you're ready or not. She started going out more, building a life that didn't revolve around me the way it used to. I told myself it was normal. It was healthy. Children grow up. They become independent. They stop needing you the same way. But deep down, I knew this was different. This wasn't just distance created by time. This was distance created by something I had chosen. Something I continued to choose every single day I kept my mouth shut. Then she met him. Daniel. The first time she brought him home, I noticed the way he carried himself. Confident, but not in a natural way. It felt practiced, like he had learned exactly how to appear trustworthy without actually being it. He smiled easily, spoke politely, said all the right things. On the surface, there was nothing wrong with him. In fact, most people would have liked him instantly. But I've spent too many years reading people to trust the surface. While we sat at the dinner table, I watched him more than I listened. Not in an obvious way, just enough to catch the details others miss. The way his eyes moved, not lingering on faces, but on objects. The way he noticed the expensive watch on my wrist before I even introduced myself. The way he asked questions that sounded casual, but were anything but. "So, what do you do these days?" he asked at one point, leaning back in his chair. "Business," I replied simply. "What kind of business?" "Different kinds." He smiled at that, but there was a flicker of something behind it. Curiosity mixed with calculation. Later that evening, as my daughter stepped away to take a call, he leaned slightly closer to me. "She talks about you a lot," he said. "Says you've built quite a life." I nodded but didn't respond. "And that warehouse," he added, almost as an afterthought. "She says you never let anyone near it." There it was, the first real sign. "It's just an old property," I said. "Must be worth something, though," he said, his tone light, but his eyes sharp. "Land like that usually is." I held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary, letting the silence stretch just enough to make a point. "Some things aren't about money," I said. He chuckled softly, as if I had made a joke, but I could tell he didn't believe me. From that moment on, I paid closer attention, not just to him, but to everything. The way my daughter looked at him, the way she defended him even when there was nothing to defend, the way she seemed happier and yet somehow more fragile at the same time. Love has a way of blinding people, of making them ignore the small things that don't quite add up. I wanted to say something. I wanted to tell her what I was seeing, what I was feeling. But every time I tried, I remembered the look on her face the last time we argued about secrets. I remembered the distance in her voice, and I hesitated, because there's a fine line between protecting someone and pushing them away. And I was no longer sure which side I was on. After the wedding, things didn't fall apart all at once. They shifted slowly, quietly, like something sinking beneath water where you can't quite see it happening, only feel that something isn't right. At first, my daughter still called me the same way she used to. Short conversations, small updates, laughter that sounded familiar enough to convince me everything was fine. But even in those early days, there were pauses where there hadn't been any before, little gaps in her words, like she was choosing carefully what to say and what to leave out. I told myself it was normal. Marriage changes people, new routines, new responsibilities, a new life to adjust to. But instincts don't go quiet just because you want them to. And mine kept whispering the same thing over and over again. Watch him. Daniel didn't rush. That's what made it worse. If he had been obvious, aggressive, careless, I could have stepped in, said something, done something. But he was patient, calculated. He let the days pass like nothing was wrong, like he was just another husband settling into married life. But every now and then, he'd drop a question into conversation, light and casual, like it didn't mean anything. "You ever think about selling unused properties?" he asked once when they visited. "Depends on the property," I replied. "That warehouse of yours, just sitting there, right?" he said, glancing at me for only a second before looking away again, as if it didn't matter. "It's not for sale," I said. He nodded, smiled, changed the subject. Anyone else would have missed it. But I didn't miss the way his fingers tapped lightly against the table, or the way his jaw tightened for just a fraction of a second. Small tells, the kind that reveal more than words ever do. My daughter didn't notice, or maybe she didn't want to. Weeks passed, and the calls became less frequent. When she did reach out, there was always something in the background. His voice, the sound of a television, the faint sense that she wasn't alone even when she said she was. Once, I asked her directly, "Are you happy?" There was a pause. Not long, but long enough. "Of course I am," she said quickly. Too quickly. "Why would you ask that?" No reason, I replied, even though there were 100 reasons sitting in my chest, none of which I could put into words without sounding like I was trying to tear her marriage apart. You worry too much, she added, softer this time. Maybe I did. But worry doesn't come from nothing. It comes from patterns, from experience, from things you've seen before and never want to see again. And Daniel was starting to look like a pattern I recognized all too well. One evening, I decided to drive past their place. I didn't tell her. I didn't call ahead. I just needed to see for myself, to quiet the feeling that had been building for weeks. The house was dark except for a single light in the living room. His car was parked outside. Hers wasn't. I stayed there longer than I should have, watching, waiting. After a while, the front door opened and Daniel stepped out. He looked around briefly like he was checking if anyone was watching, then got into his car and drove off. I followed him. Not too close, just enough to keep him in sight. He didn't head toward the city. He didn't head anywhere that made sense for a late-night errand. Instead, he took the road I knew better than any other, the one leading out toward the old property, toward the warehouse. That was the moment everything inside me went still. Not panic, not anger, just a cold, steady realization that whatever I had feared, it wasn't in my head. I didn't follow him all the way. I didn't need to. I already knew where he was going. I turned back, my grip tightening on the steering wheel, my thoughts moving faster than I could control. He was getting closer, not just asking questions anymore, not just testing boundaries. He was acting. And I still hadn't told her the truth. The next day, she called. Her voice sounded tired. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, just didn't sleep well." I almost asked her where she had been the night before. Almost asked her why her husband had driven out to a place she wasn't even supposed to know about. But I stopped myself. Because if she didn't know, then asking would only drag her deeper into something she wasn't ready to face. And if she did know, then I wasn't sure I was ready for that answer. "You sure everything's fine?" I asked instead. There was that pause again. "Yeah," she said. "Daniel's just been stressed, I guess." "About what?" "I don't know. Work, money, stuff like that." "Money? Of course." That word again, circling back like it always does. "You can always come by," I said. "Take a break." "I'll see," she replied. "I'll call you later." But she didn't. Days passed, and something shifted again. This time it wasn't subtle. It was sharper, heavier. I could feel it even without seeing it. The distance between us wasn't just emotional anymore. It felt like something was actively pulling her away, tightening its grip little by little. Then came the night everything broke. 2:13 a.m. The sound cut through the silence like a blade. The alarm, not from the house, from somewhere I hadn't heard it in years. The warehouse. I was out of bed before I was fully awake, my body moving on instinct. I grabbed my phone, opened the security feed, and there it was. The image I had been expecting and dreading at the same time. A figure dressed in black, moving quickly, deliberately, forcing the side door open. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening, my thoughts narrowing down to a single, undeniable truth. It was him, Daniel. There was no hesitation in his movements, no uncertainty. He knew exactly where to go, exactly what to do. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. This was planned, carefully, patiently. And the worst part wasn't that he was breaking in. It was that he believed he was about to find something worth stealing. I didn't call the police right away, not because I didn't think I should, but because I knew this wasn't just about a crime. This was about something deeper, something personal. If I handed it over too soon, I might lose the chance to end it the right way. So I got in my car and drove. The road felt longer than usual, every second stretching as the reality of the situation settled in. I thought about my daughter, about the life she had stepped into without knowing what was beneath it, about the man she trusted enough to marry. And I realized something that hit harder than anything else. This wasn't just his betrayal. It was mine too, because I had seen the signs, and I had stayed silent. When I finally reached the warehouse, the night felt heavier than ever, like the air itself was holding its breath. The alarms were still echoing faintly, bouncing off the steel walls, but the tension inside me had gone beyond sound. I didn't need to check the cameras. I knew he was there. I could feel it in every muscle, every nerve. Daniel had been confident when he left his home, but confidence doesn't survive the moment reality hits. And tonight, reality had a way of showing its teeth. The door was ajar, a faint creak in the silence, and the flickering lights cast long, jagged shadows across the concrete floor. He was standing at the far end, the crowbar heavy in his hands, his movements tense but still deliberate. His eyes widened when he saw me. There was a flash of recognition, and for a moment, the mask of charm and calm that he had worn melted away, revealing something raw, panicked, and dangerous. "Looking for something?" I asked, keeping my voice low and steady, letting the stillness of the warehouse do most of the work. He swallowed hard, his lips pressed together. I can explain." "You can?" I said quietly, taking a slow step forward. "Because from here, it looks like you're trying to steal from your wife's father." His gaze darted around, almost searching for an escape that wasn't there. But greed, I've learned, can blind even the cleverest. "I know what's in here," he said, his voice gaining a shaky edge of bravado. "I know the value, and I deserve a share." I let that sink in, my silence stretching, filling the room with its weight. "I don't think you understand," I said slowly, moving closer. "This isn't about value the way you think it is." He scoffed, trying to cover his fear. "Of course it's about value. That's all the world is about. Money, possessions, power. You've hidden it, and now I'm here to claim it. Simple. Simple." Such a small word, but it carried so much arrogance, so much self-assured entitlement, and that was his weakness. "Go ahead," I said finally, stepping aside and letting him move toward the steel door at the back of the warehouse. "Open it." His hands trembled just slightly as he gripped the handle, but he ignored it, twisting and pulling as though he had rehearsed this moment hundreds of times. And in a way, he had. But rehearsal can't prepare you for the truth, not the kind that hits like a sledgehammer. The door creaked open, and the harsh light from the ceiling cut through the shadows, revealing rows and rows of shelves, boxes stacked meticulously, organized with a precision that told stories of years spent gathering, documenting, and protecting. His eyes flickered over them, confused. "What is this?" he whispered, stepping inside, his voice barely above the hum of the alarm. I walked past him, picking up a folder from one of the shelves, letting the sound of the papers shift in my hands, punctuate the silence. "My life," I said simply. "Everything I've built outside of your understanding. Everything you thought was treasure isn't gold. It's proof, evidence, stories of people who prey on trust the way you do." He froze, the crowbar lowering slightly. I don't understand," he said, but the certainty in his voice was gone. "You will," I said, stepping closer, pulling out a photograph and handing it to him. He stared down at it, confusion morphing into recognition, and then into a stark, unspoken fear. It was a photograph of him, years ago, a different woman at his side, a different name, a different story. Patterns of manipulation and exploitation laid bare. "You really think this is about money?" I asked. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried an authority that made him stumble back a step. He tried to find his arrogance again, to mask the panic, but it came out thin, fragile, meaningless. It's a mistake," he said. "Not a mistake," I corrected him. "A choice, and choices have consequences." The weight of the warehouse seemed to press down on him, the walls holding the history of countless truths, every folder a witness. He realized now that the simple calculation he thought he could execute so easily, marry the woman, find the wealth, claim the prize, was never the plan he was playing against. He had walked straight into a different kind of justice, one built patiently over years. At that moment, footsteps echoed from the entrance, a sound that carried more tension than any threat could. And then she was there, my daughter, standing in the doorway, eyes wide, tears already brimming, caught between relief and horror. "Dad," she whispered. Her voice shook and it made the hair on my arms stand up. Daniel turned, caught completely off guard. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, searching for words that didn't exist. "You knew?" Her voice broke, her face pale in the flickering light. I shook my head slowly. "Not at first," I said softly. "But I knew enough to protect you before it was too late." She looked at him. "Is it true?" He opened his mouth, tried to speak, but his lies had no place to hide anymore. The truth had come out in the warehouse's fluorescent light, in the papers, in the evidence, in the photographs, in the years of patience I had accumulated. There was nothing left for him to say. She stepped closer, her hands trembling, her gaze fixed on the man she had trusted completely. You used me?" Her voice cracked. "You married me for what?" The silence that followed was heavier than any words could carry. "I'm sorry," I said gently, moving toward her, letting her feel the presence that had always been her safety net. "I wanted to protect you, that's all, from the world outside, and sometimes even from ourselves." Her eyes flickered to the files, to the folders, to the evidence of things she had never imagined existed. And then, finally, back at me. "I thought you didn't trust me," she said, her voice softer now, raw with emotion. "I didn't trust the world," I replied, "especially the parts of it I've seen." Behind us, Daniel tried to move, tried to run, but he didn't get far. The police had already been called in a way that ensured he couldn't escape. The trap had been set quietly, carefully, with the patience that only time and experience can provide. She clung to me like she had when she was small, the fear in her chest mingling with relief. The trust we had lost over years of silence started to mend, thread by thread, in that one moment of shared clarity and survival. "I should have listened to you," she whispered, holding on to me tightly. "No, you needed to see it for yourself," I said. Her tears wet my shoulder, but there was a light returning to her eyes. "No more secrets," she said firmly. I nodded. "No more secrets." And in that moment, I realized the weight I had carried, the years of fear, of protection, of silence, was not only a burden on me, but also on her. But the truth, finally revealed, had not destroyed us. It had saved us. The warehouse was no longer a symbol of danger or mystery. It became a symbol of protection, of patience, of justice, and ultimately, of truth. The man who thought he could manipulate, deceive, and steal had been exposed, and in his exposure, we found clarity. My daughter and I stood together, holding on to each other, realizing that the walls built by secrets were stronger when they were eventually dismantled by honesty. I had spent years protecting her from what I thought the world could do to her. But in the end, the world had done nothing compared to the danger that could have come from a lie, a misstep, a hidden truth. And the lesson, heavy in the air and in my chest, was clear. People who love you don't need your perfection. They need your honesty. Secrets only delay the moment where truth can save you, where trust can heal, and where justice can be served in its own unrelenting way. I looked at my daughter, her eyes wet, yet clear, and knew that the choice to tell the truth, the choice to reveal what had been hidden, had done more than protect her. It had brought her back, not just to safety, but to understanding, to clarity, to the real bond between us that nothing could ever break. The warehouse, once a silent, secretive place, now held a different kind of value, one not measured in money, gold, or possessions, but in the priceless weight of truth, love, and the kind of protection only honesty can provide. Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and storytelling purposes only. Any resemblance to real people, events, or situations is purely coincidental. The narrative may include intense emotional themes and dramatic elements intended to engage viewers and should not be taken as real-life advice or factual events.